All right. Hello, everyone. As you can see, I am with a guest that most of you know. I mean, everyone here knows. Deacon Seraphim is here with me. I am in Texas, and we are planning the next project that we're going to work on after the fairy tales, but even not just after the fairy tales, but we're actually going to start probably before the fairy tales are over.
Oh
And
yeah.
so yeah, so we're working on that. We should could we hint it? Do you think
Yeah, of course.
we should leak it already? And so the next project we're going to do is going to be called the Age of Heroes. And one of the things we realize is the biggest influence we can have right now is in the world of education, that is speaking to children, speaking to educators. And so the fairy tales have hit really hard, and we felt people being excited about what we're doing. And so this Age of Heroes project is really downstream from what Deacon Seraphim has been doing for years. That is, we're going to take the great kind of arc of heroic stories in the West, starting with Jason and the Argonauts, and we're planning to do about, at the outset, 13 books. They're going to start with Jason and the Argonauts, and that are going to move through the great heroic stories.
And there are going to be some real surprises in there for some of you.
Yeah, that's right. Most of them were going to be pretty standard. We're going to do obviously the Odyssey and the Iliad. We're going to do Seven Against Thebes. We're doing, what are some of the most more obvious ones? We're obviously doing the life of Alexander the Great through the Alexander romance
And
and
then
the
ending
legends.
with Arthur.
Yes, and then going all the way to King Arthur, kind of ending with the death of Arthur. And so we're super excited. We spent all day yesterday planning out the stories. They're going to be like chapter books, probably, at a kind of, 11, 12-year-old reading level, we're thinking. But they're also going to be for adults, honestly, because the hope is that just like with the fairy tales, we're going to have essays that will be, this time we're going to put them in the book with the story, so that for anyone, because this will be like a short narrative um, episode, but then if someone wants to look into it, wants to go further, there'll be like an essay explaining some of the symbolism, talking about the sources and stuff. And so so this is honestly, this is becoming the things that we're most excited about.
It's really
Still
exciting.
excited about the fairy tales, but it's always fun to see the future and to kind of move in that direction. So
Yeah, well, and part of it is to sort of say, I think for two reasons. One is for the kids who grew up reading our fairy tale books, this is kind of the next thing for them. But then the other reason we want to do this is because we've been kind of talking about these stories for a long time through the Universal History series, and then I've been even talking about them over on the Great Tales. But what I want to do now is actually tell the stories, because as Malcolm Guite said to me many years ago, actually, when I heard him give a lecture when I was in college, and then I asked him about it again, and he remembered the lecture, he remembered the quote when we saw him last weekend. But Malcolm Guite said, quoting somebody else, he said, "The only honest response to a work of art is another work of art." And so this is really for us we've been talking about these things, but this is really our attempt to engage with and tell a story in the vein of the medieval romance tradition in a way that shows the ways that people in the ancient world, in the medieval world, and certainly in the historical, traditional Christian world, saw all of these stories as actually interconnected. So if you've ever wondered what, to paraphrase, Athens has to do with Jerusalem, that this is going to, in part, be the answer to that question.
yeah, and so telling it as a story is the best way. So yeah, so we're definitely excited about. By the way, as Deacon Seraphim has just mentioned, we met Malcolm. I met Malcolm Guide for the first time like a week and a half ago, and and it really felt like we were meeting a kindred spirit. He, with Martin Shaw and all of the other people that are in this, let's say, in this direction. He's written a epic poetic version of the King Arthur story,
Yeah.
and he's
Which is
publishing
the
it.
most insane thing to do.
I mean, it just sounds like something that is completely unreasonable, but in this
So
moment,
good.
it just makes so much sense.
So good.
And so he's doing kind of what we're doing with the fairy tales, which is, it is easier to do with King Arthur even, which is to really pull on the threads that point the Arthurian story to its Christian roots. and he's writing it. Like I said, it's not a novel. It's a poet. It's like an epic poem, and they're doing a beautiful edition, illustrated by an illustrator, Stephen Krotz, that we also met. So yeah, it just feels like, we're not alone doing this. There are several people that understand that this is the moment to remember and to celebrate and to kind of consolidate some of these old stories. So yeah, so this is the thing we're most excited about. And so, all right, we're going to start the Q&A. As you know, the way it works is people who support Symbolic World at $10 or more, they can ask the questions in advance. I will be going through those questions, but I'll also be paying attention to the chat. If there are super chats or if there are questions that I kind of catch, we'll be answering those questions as well. And so so let's start with Drew McMahon's question. He said, "Hi, Jonathan. I saw where the Sagrada Familia was recently completed and after a few centuries of constructions. What are your thoughts on Gaudí architecture? How about Frank Lloyd Wright?" Well, I need to go. In some ways, I'm really happy that they were able to finish it. I remember when I was in my 20s, it was basically abandoned. Nobody thought that they would ever be able to. I know part of it was because they didn't have the technology to actually be able to make the thing as big as Gaudí made it. And so it feels like, for me, and I've always been wanting to go to Spain, so I'm thinking I should go to Spain to see it. I'm mitigated about Gaudí. I mean, for sure, I like Gaudí more than I like Bauhaus or some of the more minimalist or brutalist, especially, architecture movements. But at the same time, there is something that is kind of overly excessive about Gaudí, the kind of dripping architecture, that dripping architecture, and also like this I would say an over complexification of the even the geometric symbolism is so complex that it's over the top. But it's okay. At the same time, I think that maybe we need, in a more traditional type architecture, we need something that's a little over the top, that's reaching a little high to be able to counter the insanity of the cement block brutalist building. So I hope to see it. Hopefully, if I ever make it there, I can have a better insight. Maybe make a video about it or something. Love that. All right. So Curtis Cercelli asks, "Hi, Jonathan. I've been wondering about this for a long time. What is the symbolism of bringing Goliath's sword into the tabernacle? Thank you, and I hope you're doing well." Yeah, that is a very interesting idea. There's something about Goliath's sword, to me, at least in my kind of vision of the symbolism, that has to do with the flaming sword in paradise. And the reason why I say that is because the flaming sword is a spinning sword, like it's a turning sword, and there's a sense in which it's a sword that is violent, but it can also kind of turn back on the one that is bringing about the violence. And I think in the case of Goliath, that is definitely the case. Whereas when David took Goliath's sword and cut off his own head, it became really an image of that sword. And so that's why I think it's probably brought into the tabernacle, because the tabernacle, you already have the cherub, but you don't have the flaming sword. And so I think Goliath's sword probably plays the role of that sword in the tabernacle.
And of course, David takes it after that point, and the implication is like that's the sword he uses for the rest of his career.
Yeah, that it's become his sword, and it makes sense with David, because David has that aspect to his symbolism, which is that he's both like forthright to the king, but he also is not navigating the problem of sometimes acting against Israel in some ways, and so what's the right way to do that? There are a lot of stories about that, where in some ways the great heroes, they kind of have to go outside and be an enemy for a little while before they come back. I was thinking about the El Cid, legend, about the great warrior that actually fought for the Muslims before finally coming back and kind of fighting them off. And so there's something about the great hero that has that in him. All right, so let's do the first super chat here. La Pucelle made of Orly. Okay. All right. Let's go, Jeanne d'Arc. All right. An old cultural idea most perpetuated by snickering atheists is that watching porn will make people go blind. Is there a symbolic connection to this idea and the prince going blind in Rapunzel? Yeah.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure anyone who doubts that porn will make you go blind at this point is really an idiot. Like porn,
May already be blind.
that's right. Porn definitely makes you go blind, you know, and you can see it because there's you guys have probably followed this story. Like there's this massive erectile dysfunction problem among young men in our society because they have in some ways been so saturated by extreme sexual imagery that they are incapable of being aroused in a normal situation. And that's literally blindness. Like that's the man who engages in large amounts of pornography will not be able to see the beautiful woman, his wife, that is in front of him. And so, you know, anyone who doubts that at this point, you know, and it's always, you know, usually a lot of these what you would call superstitions, you know, you always have to be attentive and realize that they often hide a deeper image. And sometimes if the base version of the story, it's actually useful for like, it's useful for how can I say this? Like there's a hierarchy of explanation. Like when a mother tells her 12-year-old boy, you know, don't watch porn or don't masturbate, you'll go blind. There's like an immediate sense where the 12-year-old boy, that's how he has to be kind of scared of doing this so that he doesn't soil himself. But then there are more sophisticated understandings of these symbolism as time goes by and as you get older. And I think this is a perfect example of that. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, so Pierce Richardson says, a long time ago, did you have something to say about that, Deacon Seraphim?
I only have a funny story, and I was trying to decide if I should share the story on the internet or not.
Well, it depends if it who it humiliates, or if it's just
just somebody that I don't know. So I think
okay.
it's okay.
All right.
Yeah. So this is many years ago. I was before I was a deacon. I was working in a corporate office building in downtown Dallas, and insides of the elevators were all mirrored, so you could like see your reflection in them, which is something that was introduced to make people stop complaining about how slow elevators were. I don't know if you know this.
No, so they see themselves.
Yeah, but
so
that started like back in the 60s or something like that, when somebody was complaining about how slow the elevators were, so they bring the specialist in and he says, well, you either spend a bunch of money to upgrade your technology or you just put mirrors in there. Because people can like be checking themselves out, then they won't notice how slow the elevator is. So anyway, the insides of the elevator are all mirrored. And there was this like group of young people, like interns or something, that were kind of new. And they're all really young, and they get on the elevator, and it's like this one guy and like 3 or 4 girls, you know, and you can tell there's like some kind of a dynamic. And they're on the elevator. I'm just trying to get my coffee, you know. And they're all, you know, they're kind of giggling and everything, but then he's like, you know, he's got, you know, a do, and he starts like kind of like checking his hair out and like kind of primping a little bit in the mirror, kind of doesn't realize that the rest of us are there all of a sudden. Like he's just totally forgot about the rest of us. And one of the girls says, if you keep touching it like that, you'll go blind. But it was actually kind of like, it's a funny story, but it's also kind of a revelatory moment. Like there's something about that sort of like, he had actually become blind to the fact that the rest of us were in there, and this is just like a silly thing for him to be doing in front of us.
Yeah, but it's interesting because there's a weird analogical relationship to onanism in general, and kind of like self-pleasuring and self, you know, like and how that makes you blind to what is outside. So that's a good story. It's a good story. Yeah. All right, so Pierce Richardson says, a long time ago you said that you still don't have quite a grasp on the parts of Scripture where God changes his mind. Do you have a better grasp on this now? Why or why not? This is something I've always wrestled with as well, similar to God regretting something that he did. Thanks. What's your insight on this, Deacon Seraphim?
Well, so when the fathers talk about these, they say, obviously God is not passable, right? He doesn't actually change in that way. And so what they will say is that when you encounter this kind of language, and you always encounter it specifically in the Old Testament, when you encounter this kind of language, it's just kind of a basically like a poetic anthropomorphism, right? It's a way of, God kind of condescending to us.
Yeah.
That's a fine explanation. Obviously it's theologically correct, but it doesn't make the moment easier to understand, I think. Because the thing the thing you have to be careful about not, you have to understand that when those moments happen in Scripture, they're happening because something has gone radically off course. Like it's always because something is radically deviated from its purpose. So the examples where we see it are specifically where God regrets, making mankind because of the Nephilim and the corruption after before the flood, and so then he destroys the world with flood, but then he saves one man and his family. And then the same thing happens again with the people of Israel. The Hebrew children are basically so stiff-necked and rebellious and everything that God tells Moses, you know what? Let's do the Noah thing again. What if I just kill them all and I'll make a new nation out of you?
Yeah.
And then Moses has to step in, and if you have a problem with the intercession of saints, then this is a very troubling passage of Scripture. Moses steps in, and he seems to basically talk God out of it by reminding God of all of his promises.
Yeah.
Now, what you do with that, I mean, again, we can say, yes, okay, well, we know that the Trinity is not passable, like he doesn't change, but in this moment, what's really happening is that Noah and then Moses are being allowed to be they're being brought into the council.
Right.
They're being made part of the decision-making process. And this is how you need to understand. I mean, for instance, there are prayers, there are prayers that are, for instance, in the Orthodox tradition, prayers that are a dialogue between Christ and the Mother of God. And there's like some canons like this. I'm going to take you tomorrow to see some of Subdeacon Vladimir's new work. And he actually, one of the icons of the Mother of God, she's holding a scroll with this conversation on it. So I've been thinking about it. But this is in, I think this one's by Saint Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain. But basically, it's a dialogue between the Mother of God and Christ, and the Mother of God is saying, "Please have mercy on this creature," and then he's saying, "But he's so wicked, and he keeps rebelling against me, and no matter how much mercy I show him, he's still ungrateful." Right? And then she says, "But have mercy on him anyway." And then he's like, "Okay, since you asked, I will." And obviously, from a Protestant standpoint, that's very problematic. But you have to understand the same thing that's happening with Moses.
Yeah.
Right? Is that the saints are being made part of the decision-making process, and there's some kind of a gap between my understanding of what that looks like, and then the sort of the eternal reality of God is all love, God is all mercy, God is not changeful. And I don't know,
I think the mystery is bigger because in some ways the mystery applies to all prayer.
Right.
That basically all prayer is mysterious in the sense that if God does not change, then why are we praying? And I think that what Deacon Seraphim, what you were hinting at, is the right way to go. Is actually it is a glimmer of theosis. It is a glimmer of how God is calling us to participate in His life, and therefore we become in some ways extensions of His will in the world. And so it's very odd and very mysterious. But you could say, how can I say this? Like you could. Even not just prayer, you could say this about creation itself. That is, how can an impassible, unchanging, eternal God create something that is changing, and how does that participate in His life?
Yeah.
And I think that these texts in Scripture, they're there to kind of reveal that mystery of how we participate in God's will, and we're kind of extensions of that.
The crazy thing is, it seems to go the other way too, because you have some of the saints speak in very strange ways about like what we're really talking about when we're talking about theosis, and like what it really means to begin to participate in the uncreated life of God. And it's almost like actually all of the passable things about your life become kind of untrue. you know, and like almost like retroactively untrue.
Right, retroactively
So
true.
so it kind of goes both ways. So it is a very mysterious thing, and I think that if we just try to explain it away, and of course the fathers, when they're talking about anthropomorphization, they're not explaining it away, but they're trying to make sure that we're very clear that the God that we worship is not like the God that the pagans worshipped, you know, who are passible. But other than that, you know, I think that we shouldn't just try to, you know, take those moments of tension and obliterate them. I think we do that, you know, if we do that, we really lose something beautiful about the faith. So.
All right, super chat, Lord of the oh boy, going just jumping right into the controversy. What do you think of the mass awakening regarding the Judeo-Christian fallacy, fulfillment theology, also known pejoratively as replacement theology? You know, I mean, is there a mass awakening to that? I don't know. I think for sure the traditional position is clear that the church is Israel. There's just no doubt about that, you know, in terms of how we understand the theology. The idea, these weird dispensationalist ideas, they're very modern, they're very recent, they're very American.
Yeah, can I say one other thing about this? Father Tom Hopko of blessed memory, he always really tried to make a distinction to say the church is not new Israel, the church is Israel.
Yeah.
In the sense that it is the continuation of the faithful remnant that God had preserved, you know, mainly basically just the Theotokos and her extended family, really. Yeah. And, you know, some of the disciples of St. John, but like the faithful remnant of old, you know, of the Hebrew people had been preserved, and then that remnant brings Christ into the world, and now all who are in Christ are a part of that remnant. He is the shoot that, you know, buds, you know, forth from the stump, you know, the thing that was cut off of Jesse. And so it's not even like the church is the new Israel. There's no replacement. No. It is just continuation.
Yeah, and it's really important to understand that. Because in the Old Testament there is an image that one day God will pour out his spirit on all people, that one day all nations will become Abraham's seed. This is there in the Old Testament prophecies. And so, you know, if the Christian contention that Christ is the Messiah that brings this age upon us, then even from the Old Testament point of view, that is what has happened. And therefore, Judeo-Christian idea of these dispensations cannot be true either from a Christian point of view or from a Jewish point of view. That is, the Jews also believe that in the Messianic age, that there will be this kind of fullness where the Spirit of God will be given to all people, and that all people will participate in that promise. They just believe that is not the one that brought that age upon us, and therefore there is really no theological justification for this type of thinking. And to be honest, I think that the Jews that engage in this kind of language and are willing to play along this game are doing it for very utilitarian reason, and actually cannot believe that kind of thing. They can't themselves believe that there are these dispensations, and that, you know, so I think that we just have to be more honest about this, and just, you know, and you know, for all our sake, to be able to see it in its proper place. All right, let's continue on here. All right, so Grayson Boker says, is there a relation to the baptism of Christ and the paralytic? Thinking about the sky heavens being torn open and the Spirit descending. With the roof being torn open and the paralytic being lowered, Jesus is revealed as Son by the voice of heaven, and the paralytic is called Son by Jesus. This story of the lowering of the paralytic through the roof is one that I find very, very mysterious. It's one that, to me, it's a very odd story, and it, you know, the only thing that I can come to is this, that there's almost like a aporia in that story. It seems to be playing with something that is a kind of contradiction, or at least is one of the stranger mysteries of what the Incarnation might imply. the one thing that sometimes that the glimmer that I get is that when you read in the image of the heavenly Jerusalem, naturally you would think that the traditional symbolism would be something like, the groom comes from heaven and the bride comes from below, right? The bride comes from the earth, but that's not how it's described. It says that the bride also comes down from heaven onto the earth. And so this is the only thing that I can think of, is that the paralytic in some ways is coming down, and that it's only in it's finding his union with the groom that he is made perfect. But it's, even when I say it, I'm like, yeah, man, it's definitely mysterious to me. I don't know if you have any insight on that, because Seraphim.
My favorite thing about that story is actually the little dialogue between Christ and the paralytic, because he says, your sins be forgiven you, which is not the kind of healing he thought he showed up for that day. And then the Pharisees are all kind of murmuring, actually thinking to themselves, who does this man think he is? No one can forgive sins but God. And then Jesus basically says, like, it's harder to forgive sins than it is to heal the lame.
Mm-hmm.
But so that you can see that I have the power to do the harder thing, I'll do the easier thing. And then he says, rise up and walk.
Yeah,
So,
but the weird thing is, why does he come down from the roof?
yeah, that I don't know.
That's the thing that's
Yeah.
like surprising, because it's as if you can imagine the situation where all the people are there, and then Jesus looks up, and then this paralytic comes
Yeah.
down from heaven for
Yeah.
all intents and purposes. That's what's weird about
It
it.
is a pretty strange
Like, it's
story.
just like
I don't know. I don't have any. It's a good one to noodle on. That is, by the
Oh,
way,
for sure.
that's the gospel reading for the second Sunday of Great Lent, which used to be the Sunday of the paralytic, and is now the Sunday of St. Gregory Palamas. Anyway.
All right, so super chat here, Jonathan Britton. I have read all of the Orphan X books, and I was so pleased to see Eastern Orthodox represented with respect and reverence. Thank you for your input on that. A few things to say about that is I did an interview with Greg Hurwitz for his new book, and it cut in the middle. We had a technical problem, and we lost half of the recording, so I have to re-record it again. And the other thing to say about that is that if you didn't take the time, look on the first page of the book. Very first page. You might be surprised at what you see there if you hadn't noticed. And so that was fun. That was a fun time. But I'll do another interview with him, and I'll put it up soon. All right, so back in the Symbolic World Q&A, Ben Klimek asked, greetings. When I was reading your lovely retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, when I turned the page and saw the big bad wolf the first time, I was struck thinking I was looking at Joseph. I thought more of your telling and the Bible story, and was wondering if you had it in mind while writing Little Red. Connections I saw, big bad wolf and Joseph, coat of many colors, both consume the family. Joseph consumes his in Egypt.
Yeah.
Joseph becomes everything in Egypt. Man, that is
Nicely done,
that is
man.
some serious insight that you've got there.
Nicely done.
There's definitely that is some. Oh, sorry,
There's more here.
Uh,
Joseph's family also breaks out from within him at the Exodus to carry his bones back to Israel, the carnival for the wolf. Joseph also assumes and consumes all the places he occupies: Potiphar, jail, Egypt, family. Dang.
Yeah, that is
Wow.
some really great insight, because for sure that one of the insights that I've had about this is that there is definitely a relationship. Sorry?
I was trying to drink the water. And I
Oh,
forgot
with
to
the
take
cap.
the
Yeah,
off.
you have to take the cap off. Is that there is definitely a relationship between Joseph wearing the multicolored coat and going to Egypt. That is, Joseph is the one that can go to Egypt, you could say, and wear it as a coat in the proper sense. That is, he's able to make it through. In some ways, it's really about how Joseph is able to go into multiplicity, then ultimately gather from that multiplicity a treasure. He's something like the image of the fisher, the fisherman in Christ's parables, or the price when Christ encounters St. Peter. It's basically able to go down, gather the life that's in the depth and in the darkness, and make it and bring it forth. And so there definitely is a relationship to that. One of the most surprising things, and I hadn't thought about that at all, because what we wanted to do was to suggest the kind of rainbow colored stuff of obviously of the rainbow culture thing, and also suggest the carnival exuberance. And one of the things I didn't realize is when I showed it to Jordan Peterson, he's like, "Hey, that looks like my suits." It was like I had not thought of that at all.
Boy.
Yeah, I had not thought of that at all. So I was a little embarrassed about that. But your insight about how in some ways there's almost like a positive element to that, you know. But you have to realize that there's also, in some ways, interestingly enough, there's also the negative aspect to that as well, which is Joseph brings his family into Egypt, and then it turns on them, right, where it ultimately becomes slavery. They ultimately become slaves of Egypt, and so Egypt is kind of like the place of the many nations, right?
It's the world.
It's the world, yeah. And so then that's a great insight, Ben. Seriously, good stuff. All right. So Andrew Jackson Kane on the super chat says, "What do you make of Christ coming at the peak of Stoicism? It seems like the Stoics got about as close to the truth as philosophy could get itself." I wouldn't just say at the peak of Stoicism. I think at the peak of Neoplatonism, is in some ways concordant with Christianity. I think you're right that there is a universal thing that's happening. You know, we were talking about this, Deacon Seraphim and I, when Christ came, some of these weird things started to happen, which is that, certain miracles that were known in the ancient world stopped happening for all kinds of different reasons. Different sacrificial systems just kind of fell apart, where the people were no longer offering sacrifices despite so there was something happening kind of cosmically, obviously, in Christ's incarnation.
A sort of fullness of time, one might say.
One might say. And so it makes sense to me, it makes sense that would be refracted through the world with also insights, which is that people were coming to like deeper and deeper insights. And so I think that in some ways, the thing that Christianity offers that is different from the Neoplatonists and the Stoics is that, the philosophy approach lacks the narrative integration, right? It is abstract, and maybe it can be expressed in kind of disciplines, but there's a lack of the fullness of participation, where you don't have Stoic liturgies, you don't have a kind of Stoic celebration,
right.
You don't have a way in which it actually embeds itself in the history of your people, in the history of your family.
Yeah, you have to remember that Stoicism is a philosophical framework that basically would act as almost like almost like a DLC on top of your other paganism.
Yeah, that's right.
So it'd be like, you could be like a pagan Roman
and be a Stoic.
And a Stoic, and basically you would use the framework of Stoicism to kind of interpret the actions you're doing. But the actions you're doing are just the same as the things everybody else.
Yeah, and then they would have this weird contradiction where they would be involved in different cults and doing different things, which would ultimately be clashing with the Stoics' ethics and the Stoic way of thinking. Whereas Christianity basically brings it all together.
There's definitely a lot of things within Christianity that appealed to the later Stoics, and I think it's almost impossible for me to imagine that St. Paul had not read some Stoic philosophers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and maybe St. John. All right, Nom Grondin says, in your discussion on symbolism versus classical metaphysics, La Vie Symbolique, you stated that you believe that there is no other way for the world to be than the way that it is. Or more pointedly, that the incarnation was not optional. Now, do you mean that the incarnation had to happen, or that it had to happen the way in which it did? Might the incarnation have to have happened, but the shape that it took was changed, influenced by the fall? That's a great question. I do believe that the incarnation is the purpose of creation. It's not only that it would have happened nonetheless, is that it's actually the reason for creation, and that it is in some ways what God wanted, in creation was to, you have to think of creation almost like an overflow of love, that God is love, and so much that he creates something outside of him in order to be able to love it and to participate, and for it's his creation to participate in his life. It's like saying that he has so much love that he wants to share the love of the Trinity with things that aren't even that aren't him completely.
Yep.
And so the incarnation is, in some ways, the telos of the Trinity. Now, would it have appeared differently? And this is a really interesting idea, is that I think that it's yes and no. That I think that obviously death is caused by the fall, and the way that death manifests itself is related to the fall. But there is a manner in which the incarnational principle is an emptying out. It is God giving himself and emptying himself into creation out of love. And so, although, physically in the world, it would have looked different. It would have been Adam, you could say, that would have attained this incarnation, who would have become the vehicle for the incarnation. But it still would have looked like an outpouring. Now, I don't know what that totally looks like outside of the fall, because, I live in the world of the fall. I see death, and I see, but this idea that in some ways the sacrifice is at the foundation of reality, that God's emptying, his kenosis and his emptying into reality is actually how the world functions, and it's at the basis of creation. I think that that's definitely true, but there wouldn't necessarily have been the image that we have of the cross and the torture and all of that is definitely conditioned by the fall.
The part of what gets us sideways about this is an over focus on, this is a strange thing to say, Holy Week for us is next week, and if you're in the West, Holy Week will be happening for you right now. But there is an over focus on the cross to the exclusion of the other events of Christ's life as being actually, salvific. So we think of the cross, when we talk about the incarnation, like why did God have to become man? Usually the answer becomes something like, oh, well, he had to become man, so because a man had to die, ... But actually, these are two separate things that Christ is accomplishing in his incarnation, his assuming of our nature, his living in the body, his suffering on the flesh, right? His entrance into the lower regions of the earth, and so on. He's doing all of that. The incarnation that is taking on our nature is the thing that, as Jonathan said, creation is made for. But then there's a problem with our nature, which is that it's captive. Like we're being held for, the ideas that you find in the early church fathers is that human nature is being held for ransom by death. So Christ has to rescue us, and who does he rescue? He rescues Adam, right, the first man, which is a way of saying, obviously he actually rescued Adam, but it's a way of saying he rescued human nature, he rescued humanity, right, from Hades. So those are kind of like multiple things. One is this is the thing creation was always for, and that's what happens at the Annunciation, which in the Orthodox Church we just celebrated. And then the other thing is now, but we're captive to sin, death, and the devil. Those are the enemies that have to be defeated, and that's what Christ does in his passion. So.
All right, so our Jeanne d'Arc asked another question in the super chat. She says, "Why in the world are there so many so-called red pill men who are obsessed with the virginity of women, but at the same time they don't hold men to the same standard? What is going on there?"
Man, you guys, is it always like this?
If we're
in.
doing a public Q&A, it's gonna go there. That's how we do. But we're not afraid to talk about anything. I would say, all subjects are possible. Okay, so there are two things. One is for sure, I think that the red pill men that are obsessed with this, how can I say this? Good luck, Good luck. Life is rough and everybody's beat up and everybody's messed up and our world is chaotic. And so, if you're able to find a young virgin woman who's willing to marry you as this ortho bro or red pilled or whatever guy, then I'm happy for you. Obviously that is ultimately the best thing. Why would there be a double standard? Now this is not a strictly religious question, but I think that in terms of symbolism, has been in most cultures something that we could call a double standard, right? If you read Greek epics, if you read ancient stories, you'll see that the men are not necessarily expected to be virgins or to be in the same measure as women. And in Christianity, we do expect that, by the way. That is, Christianity, that is the ultimate vision, is the meeting of two virgins. But we can also understand why in popular culture and why in stories this is not the case. And it has to do with the legitimacy of offspring. Like, that's really what it has to do, is that, there is a reality in reproduction, which is that you always know who the mother is.
Absolutely certain who your mother
100%.
is. Yeah.
But you cannot be 100% certain who your father is. And then, if you mess up with that narrative, that is, if a woman is promiscuous, or if a woman has several partners, it casts a doubt on the legitimacy of the children. And therefore, if you do that through iterations, let's say over 1,000 generations, you can kind of understand why in many cultures and in many contexts there's been a big emphasis on female virginity and also on female fidelity. So, like I said, that is not the Christian position. The Christian position is ultimately the meeting of two virgins, and also the Christian position is that we also are all broken and we need forgiveness. And so, we always have to remember that the Christian ideal is always mitigated by forgiveness and by all our kind of sinful behavior.
I was going to say, St. John Cassian, he says that the true virginity is a virginity of the soul. And that is something which, no matter what has happened to you, or what you've done, or what's been done to you, is something that can be recovered.
Yeah. And the thing is that, if as a man you marry a woman who has had other partners, but that is truly repentant and has contrition, and also is acting out of love for you and wants to really live a life of faithfulness, that will be far more valuable than maybe a woman who's a virgin, but then, is less reserved in her behavior, afterwards, and is maybe has fantasies, or maybe she's never slept with a guy, but she's reading romance novels, or she's, like, whatever that is, these things are not like, it's not only.
But the idea that the struggle for chastity is only up till marriage is one of the things that seems to be sort of implied in a lot of these discussions.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, I did it. We made it to the altar, we made it to the marriage bed, but actually, the struggle for chastity within marriage is one that goes on throughout your life, and it's part of your love for your spouse and for Christ.
All right, so Alex Weed on the Symbolic World Chat says, "Hello, Jonathan. The Military Religious Freedom Foundation recently reported the U.S. troops were being told not to be afraid of combat operations because the Iran war was all part of God's divine plan." Oh, man. And that the commander specifically referenced numerous citations out of the book of Revelation referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. A commander also said, President Trump has been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to earth. Do you think the Iran war is a holy war? Why do these people believe they can force the hand of God? And I think that sentence is the right one. Christ says sin must happen, but woe to those by whom it happens. That is, we are not, eschatological accelerationism is a nice road to hell. Like, for your soul and for the people that you involve in this idea, there is absolutely no place in Scripture. There's no trace of any place where it suggests that we have some kind of role in trying to accelerate events in order to bring about the eschaton. That is a satanic proposition, to be honest. And so, will these events, bring about some kind of end of the world scenario? It's possible. It's possible that will happen if things escalate and we move to nuclear war and all of the possibilities that can come about with that. Will God ultimately make that part of his plan? The answer is yes. Just like God ultimately makes the moments when you sin in your life part of his plan. but it is not a positive thing. It's not like
It's not good for you.
it's not good for you. It's not saying, well, God's gonna, I'm gonna sin so that God can use this sin as part of his plan in order to save me. It's like, no, that's not how it works. It's like God will use things despite us, and will make that participate in his plan. But this type of behavior, this kind of eschatological accelerationism is Luciferian. It's a satanic trope. It's like, I can say that very clearly.
What I would like to strongly encourage people to do, if they're struggling with this, is to go and read the book of Revelation very carefully and notice that the people of God in the book of Revelation are always the ones who are being persecuted. They're always the minority. They're always the small holy remnant. You never see them taking up arms, in the book of Revelation. Until Christ returns.
Yeah, until the
render
final battle.
justice.
Yeah, until the final
And
battle.
this idea that,
So unless you think that
Yeah.
Trump is Christ, which I hope none of you do,
Yeah.
this is not good. Like
Yeah.
this, if this is the way that they're framing the war, I mean, it's hard to know because some of this is propaganda. Maybe this is not true.
Yeah.
But if this is true and this is what's happening, then this is not right. All right, and so let's see. L prologue. People have the weirdest, names. So the L prologue de Orid. So it's the prologue of Orid. So it's not. It's actually a fine name. It's just not in English, which makes it difficult. My grandma was Native American, and since becoming Orthodox, I have delved into Native medicine with my priest's blessing. What's your take on ayahuasca and things of the sort as medicine from nature, not for enlightenment? This question keeps coming up, huh? It's in the air, let's say. I do not have a final take on these chemicals and these medicines. I never thought about it until I met Jordan Peterson, and I've never taken psychedelics, and so I don't, it's very theoretical to me. One of the things that I have definitely noticed is that it seems to be a kind of way to avoid true spiritual struggle, and it seems to be like people take it as a fast track to having mystical experiences, which the church fathers and the ascetic fathers tell us to ignore anyways, which is, it seems like the thing that will happen to you in spiritual struggle, and that the fathers say this is not the goal, this is just something that will happen to you. Yes, of course it will, but you have to keep your eye on transformation and on being free from your sins and on being united with Christ. Seems to be the goal of a lot of these things. And so, if these medicines are able to help people in certain contexts, then that is possible. Definitely, I'm not the one to judge that. But I would say, in general, I think that the narrative around these things right now is to me is quite alarming, because so many people are seeing it as a. But I see in your context, you're trying to say that that's not its only use. I know that people that people have been using it for trauma response, and that it seems to be quite effective. There are different uses that seem to have some kind of results, but I'm definitely not enough of an expert. I'm just wary about the basic narrative. Do you have a?
I've worked with a lot of people who have had psychedelic experiences and, started out maybe using them medicinally and then used them more and more. And I would say it's been pretty spiritually destructive. I would, talk to your priest, but I would just strongly advise against it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's like all things. It's possible that there's a dosage issue, which is, it's possible that if someone takes small doses for medical reasons, that's not the same. Just like you would take Tylenol for pain, like that there's possible dose questions, which is that when people take large doses in order to kind of have this massive kind of out of body type experience. I don't know. Look, I'm not the judge, but I do think I agree with Deacon Seraphim that I've seen it do more bad than good, And we've run this experiment before, which is weird. We ran it in the 60s and it led to total social chaos. And now we're like, oh, maybe if we just bring psychedelics back, it'll work this time. Like, why would it not cause the same kind of massive chaos that it caused with the
thing that we're
hippies?
looking for as an Orthodox Christian is not to actually expand our consciousness. It's to bring our mind down into our heart. And the way that in our aesthetic literature we talk about this is almost like the heart is a fortress. We actually want to bring the mind down into the fortress and very carefully guard it and pay very close attention to what the inputs, what the inputs and outputs are.
Yeah.
So you can't do that if you're on psychedelics. So that's my
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, so Jason Rickard says, my mind has been trying to make connections with Marquis de Sade and Jeffrey Epstein. Is this sort of sexual fetish torture related to liberty and enlightenment, sexual ethics? This kind of thing must have always been around to some degree, but I'm thinking this is a natural product of enlightenment, liberation. Any thoughts? Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And so one of the things that the Enlightenment, does is obviously bring about this movement towards freedom from constriction. But it also secretly has this other door, which is kind of the power door, right? Which we see in books like Leviathan and these types of thought. And Marquis de Sade kind of embodies that properly, which is that without a truly transcendent God that you can be in relationship with, then what's to stop you from just, if you're an animal, then what's to stop you from, let's say, just imposing your power on others? And this becomes especially true in a world where government structures are not organically linked to the people that they rule, and that elites, the people that have authority and power, are not organically related to the people that they rule. In a traditional medieval town, the people that are in charge are related to the people that are there. And not only that, but the people that are in the land, you have to take care of them because they're the ones that make you live. They plow the field, they bring the food in. But when you have these insane, completely alienated structures, the people that have massive amounts of power in these financial positions or political positions or secret positions, then it will. And so in some ways it's interesting because that's why Epstein is such a flashpoint in terms of narrative, because his personal behavior of abusing young women and of basically treating them as the source of his pleasure is an image of a more general pattern of how we perceive our current elites are acting on us and are treating us basically as vehicles for their enrichment and as vehicles for their own pleasure. Yeah, so I would say that's why it's such a flashpoint, and it is definitely related to Marquis de Sade, because that's the type of thing that Marquis de Sade was exploring and curious about, which is, if there is no God, then what's stopping me from simply treating others as tools for my pleasure, All right, let's see. All right, so who is Saint Onesiphorus? I had a dream. You told me there were women in the Bible, and you told me about Saint Onesiphorus. I've never heard of this saint, but found in Timothy. Do you know who Saint Onesiphorus is?
I mean, it's like one of the 70, but I
like
don't...
do you know like what his is there? I'm sorry, I'm afraid that it's probably not really me that was telling you about Saint Onesiphorus.
There's Onesimus in the Bible.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. Sorry. It might just be one of those dreams that you shouldn't pay too much attention to. So the Vitruvian in the super chat asked, there's a lot of superstition around full moons. Is there Christian precedent for increased prayers, devotions around spiritually active times? I mean, I don't necessarily have insight about, is there a Christian precedent for increased prayer during full moons?
What do you mean, like spiritually active times, like the feast of the church, or what?
I mean, maybe he means that the full moon is a spiritually active time. And so the full moon is definitely an interesting. It's an interesting time. You could say that the full moon is the moment when the night is the closest to the day. In the sense that it's that there is more light in at the full moon, and there it's a moment when the moon fully reflects the sun, and so for all those reasons, you can understand why people would see the full moon and the new moon as having specific importance. Because obviously, if you go out on a new moon, you literally can't see in front of you. If there's no other artificial light, it's just pitch black, right? And if you've had that experience, but if you go out on a full moon, then it's almost like daytime. And so I think that the actual experience of this is what would lead people to develop the different superstitions that are related to the moon. Which, I mean, it would be good if you had given us an example of one of the superstitions. Usually superstitions, like I've said, usually superstitions make sense if you see them at the right level of resolution.
When you forget what the connection.
Yeah, what the level of resolution do you have to see it in order to kind of understand it? Especially superstitions that have lasted a very long time. It's hard to imagine something being transmitted for hundreds of years if it has no connection to reality. To me, it doesn't mean that it's completely right, but there has to be at least some insight in it, even if most of it is wrong. All right, so Quinn Wolf says, "Hi Jonathan, your video about historical accuracy was very helpful, but I have one follow-up question. Is it reasonable to assume that there's a scientific explanation for all miracles? I understand that this specific scientific explanation for any miracle is irrelevant and unnecessary, but it seems reasonable to assume that one exists even though we'll never need to know what it is. If not, why would we think God would violate the nature of physics any more than he would violate the nature of meaning?" Do you want to say something?
I mean, this idea that there's this thing called physics is probably the first problem.
Yeah.
In the sense that we have this way of talking about the world. Lewis talks about this in The Discarded Image, that our metaphor for talking about the world is in terms of law, like natural laws, the laws of physics, et cetera, in which case those are things that can be violated. But you have to understand that that is a metaphor, and a very recent one at that. And that is not the normal way that humans have talked about the way that the world is. And so, just as an example, all right, well, in the laws of physics, you have orbital bodies, which are held in place by the law of gravity, or the force of gravity. But in the ancient world, how would they describe or explain that? Well, they would say, and these are not stupid people, they would say, well, yeah, that planetary body is held on its course by an angel. So the idea that there's these laws of physics, and the physics is just this total fixed thing which God is then in danger of violating if he does something in the world. No, it might be that, it's just the world serves God, and he uses various spiritual intelligences and hierarchies to move the world, that the world moves according to love, which is the great medieval vision. And in which case there's no sense of violation, right? It's a miracle is just, more love. It's like more of that.
Yeah, and I think it's also, one of the things to understand is that it's weird how, on the one hand, we even in terms of technology and science, we have these crazy things. And despite that, we still maintain this weird 19th century idea of what's possible. No, actually, there are way more things that are possible than our ancestors, our kind of scientists' ancestors thought. And we know that we will discover that way more things are possible than what we think are in the future. And we know that by applying our will to the world, we will reveal these things in technical terms. That is, by the humans applying their will to this, they have created a little miracle here with this thing that has taken all of these weird forms of causality that our ancestors weren't completely aware of, and has brought them together to make something that is crazy. And so, the idea that God can do that, it's like, if we can do it, why is it that you're surprised that a miracle could do that? Just because we think that we think that everything has to happen with a certain way, but it's like we're literally using our will to manifest aspects of the world that have been unknown to people before. And that is what you could say that in terms of Christ, that is what is happening. That is Christ. So of course, if you see a miracle, there are mechanical
Right.
causes.
So this is the other thing, is that it also assumes that there's a thing called science that exists.
Yeah,
When you
yeah,
say
yeah,
a
yeah.
scientific explanation, well, science is just a mode of inquiry. So in or certainly in the medieval West, they would have considered theology as the queen of the sciences. Ergo, a theological explanation is a scientific explanation. So.
Sure. I mean, yeah. But also, I think the biggest thing is if you use the scientific mode of inquiry to analyze an event that happens, one of the things you don't have access to is the vertical cause, right? That is the will that is causing it. And therefore, the miracle, like I've said, the miracle usually happens in the vertical cause. That is, it's the relationship between the will and the thing that happens. And so, anyways, that's the most I can say about that. All right. So Anthony B says, was there judgment in the garden? And if so, how does it differ from judgment after the fall? Thank you for everything at the Holy Cross OCA Church in North Carolina. Well, it's good to see you, Anthony. There's judgment in creation, right? There's judgment right when God creates the world. When God creates the world, he names the things, he creates the world, and then he judges it, and he says that it's good. And therefore, the relationship between so you can understand that a judgment is something like the measure of something against its telos, right? It's like, how is something accomplishing the purpose for which it's there? And therefore, you could say that in the world before the fall, that all things were naturally moving towards their telos, and therefore, when God sees them, he sees that they're good.
Yeah.
And what happens in the fall is that the gap between something and its telos becomes more marked, but also you notice that it's possible, at least for some time, to twist that telos, to twist the direction of the thing towards something else, or to hold it in a position and prevent it from reaching its true telos. And that's why sometimes we say, evil doesn't exist. In some ways, sin is an illusion. I mean, it's an illusion in the sense that it's always this kind of stopgap thing where we're trying to prevent things from reaching the telos, and that's what makes them bad.
This idea of sin as missing the mark,
yeah,
is really what it's about. Is not saying like, oh, you were supposed to get, an A+ on your test and you got a C- instead. But it's more like, if I have an eye, the telos of an eye is being able to see.
Yeah.
So if my vision becomes impaired in some way, that it is missing the mark, that it is not living up to the thing that it is supposed to be. And this is the way that we kind of think about sin, and the way the Bible talks about sin. By the way, this is also the answer to the miracle question, because the reason God isn't violating the natural order, if you would call it that, when he works a miracle, is
He's
because
revealing the natural.
God is always, every miracle is actually revealing, and this is in St. Maximus the Confessor, for instance. Every miracle that God does is actually revealing the telos of the thing, of the natural thing.
Yeah.
And so you think about the greatest miracle is the Incarnation, right? When God becomes man in the womb of the Virgin Mary, right? And when he becomes man in the womb of the Virgin Mary, this is a total miracle, right? It's unprecedented. God has done a new thing, but also, it reveals everything about motherhood, what it means for there to be a womb, what it means for there to be life, like all these things, right? So it's actually just a revelation of the telos of that thing. This is the thing that creation was always made for, which was to reveal the glory of God. Yeah.
All right, so John Medijong says in the super chat says, would it be better to join a Protestant church if there aren't any Orthodox churches nearby? I would like to keep living in my local community. Look, I would say definitely it is best to join the Orthodox Church. That's 100% things that I would say. I don't know your situation. Like, I don't know how much of an effort it would be for you to become part of the Orthodox Church. So I can't decide that for you. Like, what would make sense. But if, I do believe that it is possible to be in a situation where, it's almost impossible to actually be part of an Orthodox community. And so at least the way that I've been treating this is to tell people that obviously they should join the church that's the closest to the truth, and pray fervently that God will make it possible for you to encounter a priest, to come into contact with the church. That's the way that I've been treating this. I don't know, Deacon Seraphim, what do you think about that?
Do the best that you can on your side of things, and I'll do the best that I can on my side of things, which is to plant as many Orthodox churches as
There you
possible.
go.
So that's without knowing your situation, I can't say any more than that. So
Yeah. There you go. So we're working on it.
yeah.
All right, let's see here. So Ioannis Leonardos, hello Jonathan, what do you think about the Holy Fire ceremony and the Holy Sepulchre? You have an opinion on the whole controversy about its supposed miraculous origin. There are a lot of people who believe that it ignites miraculously. There are also people who accuse the Patriarch of Jerusalem of fraud because of it. From what I understand, they never claim that it ignites miraculously, but they are indeed vague about it, which feeds the rumors. In general, what is the symbolism of the Holy Fire itself and of the controversy around it? Okay. I definitely, the symbolism is simple, right? Is that just like the resurrection, that the life comes from out of the tomb. It is not made by the outside. It's not made by us. It is something which comes from the tomb and kind of spreads into the world. And so, obviously, the symbolism of the event of the Holy Fire is extremely beautiful and extremely powerful. I've never been there. I've never seen it. I do know that I have seen, you can find on YouTube crazy videos of people, not burning their face by having the fire on their face, that is, to me, is quite astounding. So unless people are faking that, which, whatever, it seems to me like that is a very shocking thing to see.
I have several close friends and at least one parishioner who have been over multiple years, and it was totally miraculous. I personally like it. That
have had the fire.
That have had the fire and like held it in their beard. Like you know how quickly beards catch on fire. Of course. So I think it's a genuine miracle. It wouldn't be the weirdest miracle I've ever seen. So what's the big deal? Like, why is this hard to believe? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, but also in some ways, I mean, I do agree, but how can I say this? Like, it's one of those things where if someone was able to reveal to me that this was factitious, that it was done artificially, it wouldn't change my faith. Like, it wouldn't make a difference in my faith. I'd be like, oh, that kind of sucks. I would tend to think if people showed that it might be actually a lack of faith from the part of view of the patriarch, which is, you could imagine, like, if the miracle is a true miracle, that how nervous the person must. What if it stops? What if I go in and I'm the one that from the inside it doesn't light, for me, and then that could actually probably lead someone, to faking it. That would be possible. That would be completely impossible. But like I said, I don't like. I think that what I've seen, because obviously we can't see inside the sepulcher, but what I have seen in terms of how the fire doesn't seem to burn, especially immediately after it comes out of the
thing is that when it comes to most miracles, there's no
amount of proof
that will, Christ says, I'm not accusing the questioner of this, by the way, but Christ says, even if Abraham were to come back from the dead, they still wouldn't believe. Like, if you didn't believe Moses and the prophets, then you still wouldn't believe that one came back from the dead. And so, like, there is like, for a lot of people, there will always be controversy around miracles, streaming icons. I mean, I personally encountered several, like multiple mirror streaming icons. I've seen crazy things. I've seen people miraculously healed. And yet there's still people online who are like, oh, it's probably all just like a system of tubes inside the icon and things like this. And I'm like, well, no, I was holding it. Like, it's not what happened. But also, it wouldn't like, there's just no standard of inquiry that you know, like, okay, so what do you want me to do? Like cut the thing up, pull it apart, show you, like, it's just, it's
but
just,
I understand. I think I understand the question, because if I'm going to be completely honest, I have met people that are close to the patriarch that have suggested that it's artificial, and so I have to be honest with you on that. Like, I have encountered people that have kind of said that to me. So I don't know, but like I said, what I've seen and what I've heard of the people that have been there is that, you know, I don't know who lights the fire. If I do believe that it probably is a miracle, but if it's not, then there's definitely a miracle going on, because there's no such thing as fire that doesn't burn.
yeah.
But if you have like a flame and you put it on your face, I don't know. There's nothing you can put in your beard that would prevent your beard from like singeing to the fire. You know, so that's my take. So, you know. All right. Jonathan Ott asked, hope all is well. What is your understanding of the symbolism of the Star of David? There seems to be multiple things there. That is, two overlapping triangles pointing upward and downward that could reflect the masculine, feminine, or heaven and earth being united. Then there's 6 smaller triangles pointing upward and all around the star. Plus, it probably came out of the Seal of Solomon that was said to be used to bind demons. And so, I have no problem with that symbol. It's really a universal symbol. You find it in churches from the very beginning of Christianity. You find it in every culture. It's one of those universal symbols, you know, like the cross too. Like the cross, you know, like a simple cross is found in every culture. Circles, cross in circles, swastikas. Swastikas, obviously. He's looking at me like I'm not gonna. I have no problem with swastikas. I have no problem with swastikas. If everybody should know that. And so, clip that. I have no problem with swastikas. The symbol itself is completely fine.
Yes.
But I also understand why people don't use it. And I probably wouldn't use it myself. But if someone tries to,
like, we'll basically know when the whole, like, we'll know when the World War II trauma is over.
When swastikas are back.
When swastikas are we're like, actually, we don't need to let the stupid Nazis appropriate this ancient,
this like the
cosmological
one of the
symbol.
most powerful symbols ever humans have ever.
So like when we you know, but you know, obviously we're not there yet.
Yeah, we're not there yet. You know, I'm not. You're not going to see me using that image for at least for a while. And so I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a very powerful symbol, and I think that your insight is right.
Jonathan, I have no problem with swastikas, Peugeot.
But I'm talking about the Star of David. Talking about the Star of David here.
Gosh. I know, that's why this is the worst.
There is. Okay, so there's an organization in Quebec. You guys probably know about them. They're called I forget what they're called. They're basically like an alien cult in Quebec, where it's like an alien sex cult where they believe in aliens, but they also have this weird like sex magic kind of practice.
Can we get them on the channel?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And they have like this crazy. They're just the guy who runs it is basically a grifter, and like you can tell as soon as you see him. But then in their mythology, they have this idea that Jews are descended from aliens, right? And so like they're the special people. And then their symbol was a Star of David, was the swastika in the middle. And then they would go to synagogues and they would try to like convince the Jews there that they're like descendants from the Elohim, right? They're descendant from the aliens. And they would get arrested, you know, because they would literally like giving, it's really wild. They finally changed it to like a swirl in their logo. Anyways, I'm getting totally off subject.
Wow.
No, when you think you've seen the craziest things, it turns out there are crazier things. And so, I have no problem with that symbol. I think that your insight about it is definitely right. That it is an image of the union of heaven and earth, and it is also an image of the 6 days of creation, with the seventh day in the center. So it's a very powerful and beautiful image. And I think that, there have been certain gestures that have been done online. I know I saw Candace Owens doing that, where basically trying to limit the symbol to some of its uses. People do this all the time, where they say, well, because this symbol is used, for example, in sorcery, therefore it is limited to that use. And that's a very dangerous way to go, because obviously sometimes you have to be careful, like the way we talked about swastikas, but you have to be careful to constantly seed powerful symbols to whatever fringe group is wanting to capture it, because you're constantly seeding ground out of fear of being canceled, out of fear of being, you could say, infected by connection to that. And so when people say, oh, the Star of David is the Star of Rephaim, or all this kind of nonsense, that's what it is. It's nonsense. Geometric symbolism cannot be reduced to some like historical moment or some historical use of them. So it's important. All right. All right, let's go in here. So our Joan of Arc in the super chats is now asking, what is y'all opinions of the story of Joan of Arc?
Big fan.
I'm a big fan. I like Joan of Arc. I think definitely the beatification of Joan of Arc that didn't happen that long ago was definitely a great sign of French superiority. You can say it's like, Jonathan, I stopped attacking the French. What are you doing? Why are you doing that?
Oh my gosh. I mean, honestly, I've always loved the story of Joan, and I've loved the, there's a great film with Ingrid Bergman. This is like old, but it's just a really beautiful film of her life, and it's one of my, one of my family's favorite films. I think she, the weird thing about Joan is that when we got to her in school growing up, being like homeschooled in like a very conservative fundamentalist milieu, they were like, well, obviously no angels don't appear and talk to people.
Yeah,
Anyway,
except for all the times in the Bible.
Except for all the times in the Bible, but that was Bible times. They didn't do that anymore.
Yeah,
so
correct.
She was only talking to demons, or she was insane, and those are the only two options.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of those moments where I could remember as a kid being like, this just doesn't seem right.
Yeah,
it's just like, you're telling me angels can't talk to people, demons can? Like,
so
what?
Demons are more powerful. Demons are more powerful than
anyway. I think Joan was legit, and I think that her story is quite beautiful. So yeah, that's it.
All right. So Eric Solander, hi Jonathan. Is Samson is the lion, and he kills the lion, killing himself, finding honey within. Does this point to the mystery of the resurrection? Yeah, you definitely have insight. Mathieu, my brother, has been talking about Samson on some of the interviews, bringing some pretty good insight about how, in some ways, Samson is that image. In some ways, Christ solves the problem of Samson, because Samson does exactly that, which is that he realizes that he has to destroy himself in order to destroy his enemy. So there's a relationship between Samson, and we talked about the spinning flaming sword, that Samson definitely is related to that. But Christ ends up solving the problem of this, because what Christ does is that he ultimately lets himself be killed, and then what that does is that it saves his enemy. Like, it doesn't just destroy him, but it doesn't destroy the enemy, but destroys it in a wider sense, which is that he actually he's able to integrate the enemy into himself, which is ultimately a more powerful vision of how to deal with this problem of death. But yeah, your insight is definitely right about Samson, being that kind of suicidal figure, suicidal lion. Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird because in this it's kind of it's in the Bible it's kind of suggested that he did a good thing, right? By basically killing himself. Because it's not like a martyr, because a martyr, and it's not like someone who dies in battle directly, because it's not like he was in battle fighting and then he got killed by the enemy. Is that he actually killed himself, right? He actually committed suicide and then took down his enemies at the same time. So yeah. You have any opinions on Samson?
It's just a very interesting figure with a lot of interesting symbolism. I don't know. Probably could talk a lot about him, but I think that was a good answer.
Yeah. So Saint Briago says, "What is your opinion of Krishna?" You can't ask a question like that. What's your opinion of Krishna?
Repent and be baptized.
Repent.
Forgiveness of your sins.
I mean, Krishna in theory is God,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think like all ancient mythologies that there are.
But there's also like the Hare Krishnas. Like I don't know if he's talking about.
I think he's probably talking about the God Krishna. I think that in like all ancient mythologies, there are aspects of it which are pointing to the truth, and there are aspects of it that are twisted, and and so they're like incomplete. They're incomplete at best. They're incomplete principalities, right? At best, and so that is the most positive thing that I can say about
it's
Krishna.
not it is not substantially different to me than like the Greek gods or the Norse gods.
Yeah.
So the thing you want is Christ.
Yeah.
And now if you have like a question about a particular story.
Yeah, that's the thing too.
From Vedic mythology, we could probably talk about that. I mean, those stories are really interesting and have a lot of cool symbolism in them. And again, to me, that's not substantially different from, Greek or Roman mythology. And, it has its uses, and then also there are things that have to be discarded.
All right, so Eliska Chalupova says Margaret
Barker question. All right, continue. Sorry.
Several times I was supposed to meet her.
No kidding.
Yeah. And I never completely met her, but she was I did this conference in Cambridge for the Neoplatonic Association.
Yeah.
And she was part of the conference. I was actually supposed to have her on the channel. But then she didn't follow through. I got a few emails with her, and then I think she's also quite elderly, and she kind of she just let it slip. But anyway, so Margaret Barker in her temple theology mentioned that in the original Hebrew, the four living creatures, who she translates as four living ones in Ezekiel's vision, are feminine, as they support the throne for the Lord. It makes sense to me. What do you think? You're more a biblical scholar than I am. Is that an accurate? You think it's an accurate?
So first of all, just because something is grammatically Hebrew, feminine Hebrew, does not mean it is a woman.
Yeah, like we have that in French too.
Yeah, people get really confused about this stuff.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the four living creatures go, these are the cherubim. We were talking last night about sphinxes.
About sphinxes.
And sphinxes were often traditionally depicted as feminine.
Yeah.
Not exclusively so, because there are masculine Babylonian sphinxes. But
at least in Greece they were feminine.
Yeah, but they were often traditionally depicted as feminine in the ancient world. Ultimately, the way that we depict angels in iconography is kind of almost, it's androgynous, but it's also, the point is that they're, it's this asceticized vision, right?
Yeah.
And so, anyway, so in the sense that are they sort of serving a feminine function? Well, the easy answer to that is that the throne herself is feminine.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So you don't you almost don't have to do that. Like, I think that in the sense that the cherubim represent like a riddle, a question, everything, like some aspect of the feminine is definitely there, but it's much easier to say, but the mother of God, who is the throne, is actually female. Like, so you don't have to really twist yourself in knots.
Yeah. So I mean, for sure, the insight about that is correct. That is that to the extent that the cherubim act as the throne, because it's often hard to like totally understand when you think about like the wings of the cherubim, the tabernacle, and the mercy seat. Like, were the wings, like, was it the crossing over the wings that made the mercy seat? Like, was that considered the seat? Possibly. It's just a little difficult sometimes to understand the visuals of it. And so in that sense, for sure. And so you can understand why the sphinxes would be represented as feminine in some of the stories, but also you can also understand why, in terms of guardians, like sometimes they would have a more masculine sense to them. So obviously angels are androgynous, so you can understand why they maybe would be represented a little more masculine, a little more feminine for different reasons.
Yeah.
All right. Kind of running out of time here. We still have a lot of questions.
All right, speed run 'em. Let's go, Jonathan.
Speed run through the questions. All right, so
here we go.
All right, so in the super chats, what's your opinion on the three-faced Jesus icon? It is heretical, and it was declared heretical by the church.
Boom. Next question.
Pretty simple. What is the symbolism of Saint Barbara concealing or hiding among wheat? We traditionally dress up in costumes in Lebanon on our feast day. What's this about?
I mean, it's just in the story of Saint Barbara. I think, by the way, I just love you guys over there in Lebanon for loving the great martyrs as much as you do. They were in the West, like the Western churches have basically removed them from the calendar of the church. Saint George, Saint Barbara, and so on. So it's wonderful that you do that. I don't know, like the symbolism of hiding among wheat, in general is the maybe the kind of question, like, are there biblical stories where we could find somebody is hiding among wheat, like the spies are being hidden kind of under the wheat in Rahab's house? I'm trying to think if there's other examples.
I've never thought about this for sure. I mean, something about hiding in a field seems very intuitively to make sense. Like a treasure, in that sense, like
treasure hidden in the field.
And so you have to find out where the treasure is. So definitely, there's something about that.
Yeah.
All right. Jeremy Bisson asks, "Hi Jonathan, as I already wrote to you before, as a Catholic architect from Quebec, I've always been passionate about church architecture. The connection between liturgy and architecture interests me in a particular way. I see the liturgy in the West seems more fixed, less participative than the liturgy in Orthodoxy. I was wondering if you can elaborate on how architecture influences the experience of the liturgy in Eastern churches versus Western churches." Well, for sure, the lack of seats makes a huge difference in terms of a feeling of participation. When and many Orthodox churches have seats. My church has seats. But when you're in a parish where there are no seats, the experience is very different, because what happens is there's processions, the deacon comes around and senses, people are moving, people are paying attention to different parts of the church. There's always people coming in, embracing the icons. And so there's a sense, there's like a flow, and I mean, it's subtle. It's not like people are moving around like crazy, but there is a sense of that there's something living that's happening in the church.
Even medieval Western cathedrals, which did not have pews, would have been like this.
Yeah.
So if you read descriptions, one of the ways that we know this is because you can read basically accounts of like the city, like legal records of like fights that would break out in the churches, and like the town watch has to come in and like arrest some people because a fist fight broke out in the nave of a church over a chicken because people had brought their animals with them to church that day. So it was like, I think that the chaos of like your average medieval cathedral would be like really, really offensive to a lot of people who think they like traditional Christianity today.
It would have been people moving around talking.
People moving around talking, doing private devotions, all these different things.
Yeah.
I think the big, there's a lot of different things, like approaches to lighting and approaches to different architecture. Andrew Gould has talked about a lot of these things, but I think that to me, one of the biggest differences is the sense of, am I watching somebody else do something, or are we all doing something together? And definitely in the Eastern liturgy, I really have the sense that we're all here doing something together. Even as a layman, I had that sense.
Yeah. All right, so Dorothea Kate says, "Hi Jonathan, what is the symbolism of Pilate's wife, Claudia Procula, and her dream of Christ? How does she fit into the story of the Passion?" So it's a very important role, because in some ways she is revealing the counterweight of the authority. And so, and so you have Pontius Pilate, who is representing the authority of Rome, and then you have his wife, who is in some ways representing the hidden aspect, right? The dream aspect, the sleep aspect, and she also, is also a kind of a secret motivation. She's one of the first. She's one of those images in Scripture that show how there's often in Christian stories and hagiography, there's often a woman hiding behind the masculine public gesture, which you see with Constantine, with Saint Vladimir. There's so many examples, like there's just indefinite examples of how there's this kind of secret influence, which you see also in the Mother of God at the wedding of Cana. So I think that this is one example of it, but it's particularly powerful because it also shows this counterweight to the public, state authority, and then the woman who is this representing the dream like puzzle quality of it, because she's like, she doesn't really know why. She's just like, I got this dream and you shouldn't touch this guy, but she doesn't really explain it. It's mostly it's almost like she's presenting also a puzzle to him,
Lots of interesting Ethiopian legends about the Pilate family.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Well, I know that in some traditions they're saints.
In the Ethiopian tradition.
Oh, okay.
Specifically.
All right.
Only the Ethiopians would do that.
Daniel Bautista says, "Hi, Jonathan. What could be the reason that the Lord, when performing miracles, sometimes doesn't do it with one word? Like when he mixed spit and soil to heal a blind man?"
This is a good question.
Yeah, I noticed that the different instances seem to involve purifying act, washing, fasting. Yeah, for sure. In the case of the spit, it's not unrelated to word. It's almost like the water from heaven. You think about, it's like in the way that, if you look at the images of baptism, you have often St. John will raise water up in the ancient images, and so there's water below in which he's being immersed, but also water above that is being poured down. And so Christ spitting into the dirt is also an image of that relationship between heaven and earth. But it's because the mud is, the mud is in some ways a kind of, it's almost like he's returning the person back. He's doing a little flood. He's basically, it's like a baptism. It's kind of like a baptism. He's kind of destroying the unformed or the misformed aspect in order to reform it properly. And so that is at least my insight about why that happens that way. All right. All right, so Patrick Island says, "Forgive me as I stumble through the question. After recently finishing Paul Kingsnorth Against the Machine and listening back to your conversation with him, Christ's words been continuing on my mind. To be in the world, but not of the world. I work for a large retail company as a leader in service and engagement. The consumerism, continual striving after growth, and false secular sacred divide are all enough to deeply sadden my soul. However, I recognize also the opportunity I have to serve my employees and nearby community. Would you also be able to share any thoughts or considerations on the symbolism of retail and business as I try to work out this problem? Thank you for all your work." And so, there are a few things. One is we have to be cautious that working in retail or working in a warehouse or doing distribution is not immoral per se. It's not anything that is immoral. Now, is it participating in a system that is excessive, that leads to the passions, that leads to immorality? You could argue that to some extent, but I would also be cautious again. The idea of thinking, this weird idea that the things we do in the world, how can I say this? There's something about our world which is very luxurious. We have a luxury to not understand that we sometimes function in the world and we do these things in order to support our families, and that we're actually working to supporting our families. That's the thing that's important. So in your case, I would say that if you feel that you're in a situation where you're participating in something that you don't totally align with, then I would say, to not go crazy, to not quit your job, to do that, because you are responsible for your family, but to first of all pray and ask God to bring opportunities to you that would lead you into something that's more meaningful, and that is closer to what you think is right and true, and then keep your eye open for opportunities for you to do that, and then maybe also understand that you might have to take a pay cut for sure. You might have to not make as much money, and that's okay as well. But I think that Paul's insights are extremely useful and are very powerful. But we have to be careful not to overplay. We are not. So you could say we're not of the world. We are in the world, but not of the world. And so it's also not necessarily a role to fight against some of these things.
Right.
Like it's not our function to basically fight the system. Christians have never fought the system. Christians have been in the system trying to, like you said, manifest love to others, be that link, be that source of grace for others. But
Martin says be an angel in the machine.
Yeah, be an angel in the machine, and it's hard to do.
I definitely know some people who kind of bounce off of Paul's book because they were like, well, what does he want me to do? Starve and die? Like, it seems like he just wants me to starve and die. Like, I'm disabled. Without a grocery store near my house, there's no way for me to, so Paul is I think his book has a prophetic role right now. It's just to point out some things that are deeply and desperately wrong. But you, like all things, you have to be a little careful about how you try to apply that stuff, or you'll go crazy.
Yeah, that's right. That's a danger. So White Lawrence says, would you ever do a podcast with Sam Hyde? He once mentions liking your videos. I have to tell you that if Sam Hyde asked me to come on his podcast, I would be seriously tempted. I might ask for wisdom around me first.
Do it.
And so there's something about when I talk about Ye, or if I talk about people like that, kind of like these weird fool characters, for sure Sam plays that role. I know that he's also come closer to Christianity. I don't know where he is in his life. I know that he's been interested in Orthodoxy. As people know, he's friends with Jay Dyer, and he's definitely hilarious. I mean, Sam Hyde, it's hard not to find him funny. So Sam, if you ever hear this, who knows? All right, let's see. All right, let's do a few of the top super chats here, and then we're gonna close this up. All right, so can you discuss the relationship of Orthodoxy to the zodiac and iconography as a gospel that points to Christ, serpent crushing the shepherd, and the fall of paganism? Zodiac and iconography. I mean, there are sometimes the zodiac and iconography. Sometimes you see the zodiac around Christ in different churches.
Especially as part of a scheme where the entire church is imagery from the apocalypse. Yeah. Because of where the zodiac is in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have a problem with the zodiac at the symbolic world.
We have
a class.
Whole class. Which is actually incredibly excellent. We did a whole class about this.
So it's called The Art of Imitating Heaven. You can check it out.
I gave also a long talk at the Lord of Spirits conference, which at some point I will redo the whole thing for you guys here on the Symbolic World.
All right, so there is a tension between the magicians who wish to pull us all into a more subtle realm, and beauty as a whole is a subtle thing. We can't train to see it. As porn makes men blind to women, what makes us blind to beauty? I mean, for sure, in terms of being blind to beauty, for sure, the oversaturation of our world, the saturation of our screens, the kind of hyper aesthetics that we see in advertisement or in video games, it can put you in danger of not being sensitive to natural beauty and to the beauty that is in God's creation. And so, just like fast food, if you eat too much fast food, you won't be able to appreciate a nice subtle meal. The same thing with this kind of stuff. So you have to find a way to have some kind of asceticism also for your eyes. All right, guys, I'm not gonna be able to do all these super chats. Okay, Matt says, I'm reading a book called God's Eye View by Trevor Lowman. He talks about the double slit experiment and its conclusion. Observation is necessary for matter to exist in a definite time and space. Do you have any thoughts? Yeah, for sure. I do think that the symbolism of the double slit experiment is very powerful, because it's the relationship between a wave and a point, basically. And so you have flux that in some ways concentrates and appears as something that is definite and has place with the measurement. Obviously, it's an analogy. I don't totally understand this stuff. I'm not a scientist. In terms of the analogies that people use, I can see the symbolism. And so it's definitely interesting that that as you go down in reality, you realize that intelligence is necessary for the categories of the real. And I think that's something that we definitely, as Christians, should all agree with, and not be surprised that that's what they ended up finding down there. All right, so we're going to do 2 more, and then we're done. Some people argue about whether mathematics are real and govern the natural world and is discovered, or they are a tool created to understand the natural world. Is there some kind of similar argument to be made about symbols? And so, yeah, I think that we have to be careful. You could say that the proportions of the world, they're necessary for the world to exist. And so mathematics are real because things have proportions and there's relationship between those proportions. And then those can scale at different levels, whether it's actual quantifiable measurement or simple proportional relationships. And so these are definitely something that are necessary for reality to exist. And in this, that is also the same thing with symbolism, is that the symbols they're basically hierarchies of participation. And they're patterns of being. And so then, of course, they end up becoming applied in different ways, and the way we represent them or the way they appear in the world are different and are closer, you could say, to our relative, you could say, existence in the world. But the proportions themselves, they're necessary for reality to exist. All right, last one. How do you avoid neurosis when trying to identify logoi, telos, or meaning within the most mundane activities? Can you carry out God's will when doing the dishes, for example? Think Sherard's The Sacred in Life and Art. I would say the thing about this is not to think about it too much. That's what causes neurosis. When you're doing the dishes, the way to experiment, you could say the telos of what you're doing is to do it. So you do the dishes well, you do it, and you find the balance between going overboard and cleaning them too much, but also leaving a bunch of food on the dishes, right? There's just a balance but it happens in doing it. It doesn't happen in thinking about it.
There are a few tasks which are more in line with God's will than doing the dishes.
Yeah, it's
about as
the
as
telos
close
is
as you
so
can get.
clear.
Like so much so that even as a deacon, that is one of my jobs.
Is to do the dishes.
Is to do the dishes afterwards, to make sure everything is cleansed, everything is clean. There's no crumbs, there's no residue, right? So it's a setting in order, it's a cleansing, it's a purification, it's all those things. So yeah, you would be hard pressed to find an activity in which you can be more in line with God's will, I think, than doing the dishes. So do them well, and you'll pray while you do the dishes.
All right, Deacon Seraphin, thanks for being on this Q&A.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
This was fun as usual. You guys kind of overwhelmed me with questions, which is good. It means that you care, and so it's great to see everyone. And for those of you who are Orthodox, I hope you have a wonderful end of Lent, Holy Week, and a wonderful Pascha. And we will see you after in the light of the resurrection. All right, bye everyone.
Bye everyone.